Yeah, that's it. That is it.
Your girl is losing it.
Yes, Octopus's Garden is the best Beatles song ever recorded.
Why don't you just say Piggies?
Huh. It's a cool shirt. Joy Division. Huh. What is this? My mind. I can't even believe this. Music. Joy Division. Love will tear me apart. I can't believe this. What's going on? I never bought that poster. What's on my shirt? Does my music taste better than everyone else's? Hello everyone! Welcome back to Group Lesson. My name is Nathan and this is post-punk. Post-punk is a genre that started in the mid to late 70s. I just want to say a quick thank you for hitting 50 subscribers, which to some people might not seem like a lot, but for some... What the hell happened? Last video was my 50 subscriber special, and this video is my 200 subscriber special. Damn! I'll keep this short because I literally just said all of this. But my goodness guys, thank you so much for the support. I'm so passionate about making these videos, and seeing people enjoying what I would be doing even for just one person means the world to me. So thank you so much. And if you're not subscribed, please go ahead and do so. If you don't want to, it's okay. I won't be mad, just disappointed. But anyways, thank you again. Back to the video. Post-punk is a genre that started in the mid to late 70s and is the beginning of my mild confusion every time I see post in front of a genre name. I'm sure everyone can guess that post-punk is an offshoot of the genre punk that we saw being spearheaded by bands like The Clash, The Ramones, and The Stooges. However, post-punk took a lot of the energetic DIY aesthetics of punk and just experimented with different stylistic influences back into the music. One of the most door-opening and influential genres, this was spearheaded by acts such as Wire, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, Public Image Ltd, and The Talking Heads, just to name a few. Punk being a more stripped-down version of rock music when it comes to song composition, post-punk sought to unstrip that and create a more unique version of its predecessor. I put thousands of hours into this genre. I love this genre, and what I love about it most is that it can experiment with different stylistic influences while still being something you can identify as post-punk. The use of synthesizers, strong bass, some jangly ass guitars are the core of what I would associate with post-punk, but sometimes they can get pretty off the wall with it. I'll go through the stylistic influences that post-punk went through, more or less, but it did end up just dissolving as the bands that spawned from the movement started to move away from that sound. The most notable shift being the explosion of new wave that we saw in the 80s. Taking the foundation that was introduced by post-punk and just introducing more poppier elements into the music. Think Tears for Fears, Duran Duran, Devo, just to name a few. And then we saw the emergence of post-punk revival, which to me is just garage rock, but what do I know? The modern state of post-punk or pure post-punk is a little bit weird because what I would describe as modern pure post-punk would be stuff that's coming out of the windmill scene in the UK, but that's a whole different video entirely. But at the very least, right now, we have a list of albums that define post-punk as a genre that we can fall back on and talk about. Unlike the last video, this list isn't entirely from Rate Your Music. This is something that I got from a wide range of publications, just taking note of everything that I saw the most of. There's obviously a lot of crossover as these albums are all very revered, but that's not entirely what it is. So take this list not as an understanding of what albums are better than others, but just as if you want to get into this genre, these are the 10 albums that you should be studying. I did, however, sort this album based off of average rating just to keep some kind of cohesion, but these albums are all very great in their own regard, so that's not entirely what it's about. But enough yapping. Let's start this post-punk journey with Pink Flag by Wire. I'm glad that we started with this album because a lot of people can point to different starting points of post-punk or what the first post-punk album is, but to me, this is where it starts. Wire is a band that formed in 1976 that was most associated with the hardcore punk scene. So when you listen to this, it's more or less 75% punk, or what you would expect from punk coming out of that time period. It's energetic. It's punchy. They yell 1, 2, 3, 4, which is hilarious. It fits all the punk criteria, but there's that little 25%. And that 25% of the album is the precursor of what would come after that. Wires themselves would follow the movement with their follow-up album, Missing Chairs, which in itself is an incredible post-punk album that showed up on so many lists. But I wanted to include this one more because to me, this is it. This is where it all began. An album that had so much more going for it than just being a straight-up punk album, giving you a taste of what the next decade of music would sound like. If you go ahead and listen to this for the first time, in a vacuum, it is still a very fresh and unique listen. But in the context of post-punk history, you can see this attitude shift in real time. Throughout the track list, you can see how this genre would shift into the golden age of rock experimentation. And now, on the other side of the coin, we have a band that represented the shift away from post-punk in New Order's 1983 album, Power, Corruption, and Lies. New Order was a spin-off of Joy Division, which is something we will obviously get to later. And while the longer they moved forward, they tended to stray away from their post-punk roots, which is something that I got into in the beginning of this video, they left behind their most beloved album in their entire career. You can hear a lot of what this band meant to the world of post-punk, but throughout the track list, you can also hear what it will become in the world of new wave and synth pop. It still has a lot of its moodier songwriting. You can kind of feel a shadow being overcast the entire album, but a lot of it can honestly be pretty upbeat and poppy. A far cry from some songs that they were making not that long ago. But regardless, an album that showed the future of what music would sound like, and a band that would have a very long and storied career. And that brings us to Juju by Susie and the Banshees, which is just everything to me. I love this band front to back, and this album is such a good listen. This is our first foray into the very prominent spin-off of post-punk being gothic rock, and it's a very good one at that. You will notice a darker energy and a vocal styling that I can only describe as nocturnal, being what defines this genre spin-off so well. And that's not to say that this album is just a mood fest of slow songs, because it has the energy that you would expect from punk and post-punk, but just kind of has a gloomier nature to it. We still employ some other musical leanings like art pop and dark wave that is also very intertwined with post-punk to give us an album that is just laced with style. And with Susie Sue being such a prominent public figure, we saw post-punk evolving into the broader culture with fashion movements, as Susie Sue was such a prominent fashion influence of the 80s, dressing as how many of us would describe it now as trad goth. Highly influential album, very successful album, incredible start to finish. If you haven't yet leaned into the experience of how post-punk would transition into gothic rock, this is where you should start. Next, we move on to Deceit by The Heat, which is an album I've never heard of before, and I've obviously never heard before, so I was so surprised seeing it land on so many people's top lists. This debut album from English experimental rock band This Heat saw the genre being taken to a very progressive direction. It's avant-garde, it's prog rock, and listening to it, I could see the foundation being set for other acts to take from it like Black Midi. As far as I can tell, this was the band's more prominent work. They released stuff after this, but it never really reached the heights of what this album would. And as someone who enjoys post-punk and prog rock, I liked this. It wasn't my favorite, but it was still a very interesting listen and something that I think everyone should give a listen to as well. And now, it's time to boogie, ladies and gentlemen. You thought post-punk was just all artsy-fartsy dark music? No. It's twerking time. We move on to Entertainment, the 1979 album created by Gang of Four. And mind you, not the only notable dance punk album on this list. Gang of Four employed dance and funk elements into post-punk to create a sound that you could boogie to on the weekends. And this may be the first to do that, being a trailblazer for what other bands could do with dance music and post-punk. Hence, its inclusion on this list, and an inclusion that's been on every list I've seen so far. However, it was awesome. I loved it. But I do think there is an album on this list that did it just a bit better, so I'm just going to save what I have to say until we get to that album. But regardless, it was great and it lands on this list. And finally, we have an American on the board. USA! Yeah, this is really good. Marquee Moon by Television. Their debut album that hit it out of the park with alternative rock and post-punk. What this album brings to the table is incredible songwriting and incredible guitar work. If you have not listened to it yet, please go listen to this, especially if you love guitar. An incredibly foundational album for anything art and alternative to come after it. And though their career is not insane, as they only released 2 albums after this that absolutely did not reach the heights of this one, they were still able to put something out that is very influential to the world of music and is still being talked about almost 50 years later. It absolutely stands the test of time. And just a little over halfway through this list, we land at the album that came out most recently, Death Consciousness by Have a Nice Life. This 2009 album reached cult status, being put on boards like Mew and Reddit. Surviving through Reddit, it became a beacon of chronically online album listening. And for good reason. This thing goes freaking hard. This album features elements of gothic rock, industrial, shoegaze to create something that is just so mind-melting. And it only gets better as it goes on, experimenting with sounds that you have never heard before either on this list or any other list. There is certainly a Venn diagram of genres that post-punk pulls from, or that exists around the genre, but what Death Consciousness does is pull something completely different out of the ether and delivers a very unique listening experience. An inclusion on this list that is not just from chronically online nerd territory, but it's put on many different lists from many different places. I don't think this is very representative of post-punk as a journey, as there wasn't anything that sounded like this before, and to my knowledge, there's not much that still sounds like this now. It's a side street off the main road that is incredible to explore, but at the end of the day, leads nowhere. And that main road continues, and is defined by this album, which I'm sure everybody saw coming from a mile away, Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. Who would have thought we would have got here? This album lives on in the shirts that you can get from your local mall, or that person in your life that swears he's just like me for real. For the time that this star shined bright, it set the foundation for many genres and bands and albums that would come after it. If there was a count of how many times bands were cited as an influence from the bands on this list, Joy Division would take it and run with it. Especially since many of these songs would become the precursor of what would eventually be known as gothic rock. Ian Curtis's death is very unfortunate, as not only did he die, but he kind of took the band with him, as they were able to put an unmatched care into this album and even the album after this one. Closer in its own right is just as good, if not better, than this album. 2 of the best rock albums of all time from a band that was gone way too soon. When people think of post-punk, more or less, this album cover rings in their mind. And you cannot blame them for that. It is just that good. Everyone's listened to this album at this point, so there's not much more I can give on it, but it is obviously one of my favorite albums of all time. Shocker. However, if there was another album that popped in your head that wasn't Unknown Pleasures, it's probably this one, and you cannot blame them for that. Disintegration by The Cure might be the most recognizable and popular post-punk album of all time. This gothic rock, post-punk, dream pop album released in 1989 can stand tall as one of the most, mainstream or not, recognizable albums. The Cure was able to break into the larger music landscape, introducing more popular elements into their work. I mean, everyone knows The Cure. Your mom knows The Cure. Your grandma probably knows The Cure. They've probably been to some of their concerts. I talked about this album more in my last video, so I'll try not to repeat myself, but it returned to form for the band, creating a darker and more introspective atmosphere. The Cure, trying to react to their more increasing popularity, made something that they thought the mass would reject more, but in turn, they created an empire. If you look up post-punk and gothic rock in a dictionary, Robert Smith's face is going to be plastered on that page. Shaping music culture, makeup, clothing style, hair, and has been doing this for almost 50 years. The Cure is on the post-punk Mount Rushmore, and if anybody asked me for one album to get into the genre, this is that one album. And there's a good chance it would be most people's one album too. Alright, what's next? Oh, hell yeah. And now we land at our final album with Remain in Light by Talking Heads. An album that introduces influences like dance, funk, Afrobeat to create something that you've never heard. Unless you've heard this album, then never mind. One of the most experimental albums on this list, it pulls from a lot of the sounds that were being very popular or emerging around that period of time. And the Talking Heads, man, they were just freaking weirdos. I love it. A stage and musical presence that we have not gotten since, and that is so depressing. I also just talked about this album, so I'll keep it a little bit short, but I just love it so much. I adore it, and I am so passionate about it. Because on paper, looking at what this album did, you would not think it works as well as it does. But it did, and the world is just so much happier for it. As soon as it was released, it was a huge hit. It is the last album we're talking about on this list, and a great one to end off on. Post-punk is a highly influential genre, doing so much with so many other stylistic influences. While the core remains the same, it allows an unlimited amount of exploration within the confines of its defining characteristics, while still having a sound that remains uniform throughout all bands and albums. The death of post-punk sprung about more genres to carry on its legacy, and its real revival in recent years has seen more incredible creative liberties being taken with the genre. If you want some more modern albums to check out albums and bands that are coming out of the windmill scene, as I feel like they've carried out the pure sound of post-punk very well into the modern age. And also listen to Fontaines DC because they are my favorite band. Again, if I had to rank these albums, it would go Entertainment, Pink Flag, Marquee Moon, Death Consciousness, Power Corruption Lies, Juju, Remaining Light, Disintegration, and to no one's surprise, Unknown Pleasures. But again, not the point. I just need to rank something every week or else I will disintegrate into a puddle. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Thank you even much for the support. If you like these videos, please consider subscribing, please consider liking, and let me know which subgenre you would want me to do next. Again, thank you so much, and I will see you all next week.